Hello, Nav here, plastic surgeon. Welcome to the Real Clinic podcast, sponsored by 42 South Films. This is where we take a behind-the-scenes look at the surgery industry, get to meet key players in the business, learn about setting up a clinic such as Real, and meet some of the best surgeons around. Welcome to another episode of the Real Clinic podcast. I'm Nav and we're here at the Real Clinic. I'm really pleased to introduce you to a good friend, Ed Keelan, who is a partner in Octopus Investments, who was instrumental in helping me set this place up with the partners that I now work alongside with. We're going to talk about, some of the technicalities of the financial side of setting up a company like this, and some of the mistakes that certainly I made, and potentially one of the big mistakes that I was about to make before I ran into Ed serendipitously. So if you wouldn't mind just tell me a bit about yourself. Who are you? You can go into how we know each other as well, and your education, childhood, as far back as you'd like to go, and what ended up with you, sitting in front of someone like me today.
Yeah, so in terms of where I'd start my journey, I'd probably, the most interesting bit is I left university. I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do.
Yeah. What did you study?
Studied business and finance.
Okay.
My parents were always entrepreneurs. So like most, I think most young people, their parents want them to get a stable job, somewhere they'll be happy, all the rest of it. Whereas my parents were quite the opposite. Like both parents entrepreneurs. What they really wanted is like, what business are you going to start? How are you going to become an entrepreneur? Kind of what are your ideas out there, Ed? All this sort of stuff. And so when I joined Rolls-Royce as my first job out of university, I think they were quite disappointed. They were sort of like, that's not very exciting.
And what did you do in Rolls-Royce?
I was a commercial officer.
Is that up sort of, I can't remember, Crew, is it? No, that's
well, the
Bentley.
main place is in Derby, but I was based in Bristol.
Right.
It's fair to say that I was kind of curious. Like, I'm always curious about things that I don't know.
Yeah.
And all I'd known is entrepreneurship, because all I'd seen is my parents be entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And so I was always kind of curious to, like, what's it like to work in a big company? What's it like to work into a blue chip organization? And 9 months later, I decided it definitely wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And I would never be part of a blue chip organization. Although I was doing okay there at Rolls-Royce, this is the aerospace, so making jet engines that were going into military planes predominantly. Everything was a bit slow. There was a lot of people that just had jobs. I didn't really know what they did. And it felt very hierarchical. So like, you'd get the message on a Wednesday, like, all the managing directors coming around on a Wednesday, everyone looked busy Wednesday. And I just thought, from the world of entrepreneurship that I've been brought up in, this was completely weird to me and alien.
Because I don't know your mum very well, but I know your dad quite well, because he, Eamon, he's been sort of financial advisor to my parents, for decades really, and I know he had his fingers in different pies, and your mum, I think, also was running, I can't remember, some kind of clothing, or is it to do with horses or something? I can't.
Yeah, well, they met at Manchester College of Fashion, and they were both into clothing manufacturing. Yeah. But as clothing manufacturing sort of moved abroad, that meant that my dad looked for a different job, so he went into financial advice. My mum sort of stayed within manufacturing, and we were sort of co-owners of a jodhpur company, so making horse riding wear, which I think is kind of, there is a certain irony to it, because none of our family ride horses.
Oh, really? Okay.
And none of our family are, we don't come from a very wealthy family in terms of kind of the aristocracy that suggests that a jodhpur company would come from. But they used their training to develop this company called Tally Ho, which was a jodhpur company. And so, like, my childhood was the lounge full of jodhpurs and breeches and counting stock from the garage and all this great stuff. So, between doing my dad's cash flow and counting my mum's jodhpurs, all I knew was entrepreneurship and early stage business. And it really excited me. So I always loved the idea of entrepreneurship. Like you, with this amazing place now, this incredible facility, started on kind of probably a coffee or having a beer and just discussing it. And I just think how there's not much else in the world where you have like a kernel of an idea, something that's just in your mind, this little flicker of a spark, and then gradually it becomes reality.
Yeah.
And then you employ people, and then there's people working here, and then there's people, customers, and then it becomes like an organism all of its own.
Absolutely.
And you have no idea where it's going to go. It's just a complete adventure. So I always loved entrepreneurship, just from a really early age.
Yeah. And so again, before we get into how you and I have worked together, because I'd really like to talk about that, because I think that's important for our main audience, which are probably colleagues, surgeons like me, potential doctors who might end up being surgeons. So you then quit Rolls-Royce.
I did 9 months, and then I had the chance to join a startup, which was actually using the Rolls-Royce ways of doing things for other companies.
Yeah. And what do you mean by that?
So they were using training methodologies that Rolls-Royce used, and the sort of person that was using those training methodologies and knowledge, what they called knowledge management, so how you move knowledge from one engineer to the next.
Right.
They wanted to bring that into other UK engineering.
Yeah.
And so they started a consultancy business that did that. And
is this because Rolls-Royce is particularly good at doing
that? Yeah, because Rolls-Royce was famously good at doing that.
Yeah.
So we'd work with the nuclear power sector, or we'd work with big engineering firms. And I was employee number one. So they kind of, I'd got itchy feet pretty much already.
Yeah.
And so they asked me to join and be part of that. So I was employee number one, which was great fun. We grew that company over 3 years to doing over $1 million in revenues, but it never felt like it was about to be lift off. And then I had worked in San Francisco for about a year, and a friend who I'd worked with in San Francisco was talking about his next career move.
Yeah.
And he mentioned this idea of venture capital and how, there is a whole career out there where you just take pots of money and decide where to invest it into early stage businesses. And as soon as he sort of talked about what venture capital was about and what it all meant, I was like, that is the career that I want to do. It's got the finance element, and it's also got that entrepreneurship.
And how long are we talking about now?
Well, that was 16 years ago as of the first. Well, the conversation, actually, the conversation probably 17, 18 years ago. Yeah. My job, the problem I had, being quite honest, was that the jobs in venture capital tended to go to privately educated people from very wealthy backgrounds who probably...
you've talked about your family not being the aristocracy, but your education, was it fairly average, or was it fairly...
Probably not average, because I was state educated. And state educated and dyslexic, and heavily dyslexic. So I was kind of like double whammy. So fair to say that education was a bit of a struggle for me, bit of a grind. But I got through it. Ended up going to Oxford to do my master's, where I kind of guest lecture now on topics around entrepreneurship and finance. So
you came good.
It's worked out. I like to think I'm a slow burn. Slow start.
I see. I was state educated in the UK. I had a stint of private education in India, but like yourself, again, I'm pretty certain I'm on some sort of ADD, ADHD spectrum, which most surgeons are. We're all a bit weird. In some way or another, and I think but I was labelled as lazy back then. That was probably what I was called, and I still think of myself as lazy. And my son is similar, but he's been supported. Actually, it's amazing how much it's changed and how much better it is, I think. So I guess we've both kind of, in spite of it all, whatever, got to where we are. So having then decided to go into venture capital, the venture capital side of things. What happened after that? How? Because you're now in Octopus, aren't you? You're now a partner in Octopus Investment, which is the sort of original bit of, everyone probably knows, the energy company.
So if I step back on it, again, bit of a difficult background in terms of getting into venture capital, because it does tend, especially then, it tended to be Goldman Sachs investment banker types that wanted to be a bit more trendy, and so they went from investment banking into venture capital. So my background was definitely not typical venture capital. Ironically, it kind of is more so now. So more and more now, it's about people with entrepreneurial skills who have decided to move into supporting other entrepreneurs.
And is that a good thing? I don't want to get too much into the ins and outs of venture capital per se, but I'm guessing that must have made it more exciting and more.
I think whether it's a good thing or not, I think probably generally, because you can kind of it's easier to work with the entrepreneurs because you've been in their shoes and you've worked with them before. But look, it's an industry, just finishing on it really, it's an industry where over 70% of the industry, over 70% of partners in venture capital firms in the UK are privately educated.
Okay.
And if you put grammar schools on top, it's more than 80% of so it's like, it's quite rare to have I don't think there's many sort of state educated dyslexics that went. So, not necessarily an easy path. And the how I got in, I'm very fortunate. Octopus is a great company. Obviously I've been there 16 years now. And so I would say that, but it's a fantastic company where sort of social mobility and mobility internally within the organization is a big deal for it, something it focuses on. And I started off in sales. So I went from, I knew that if I could I've got this kind of principle, if I can get onto the right ladder, I can generally climb it, but it's getting onto the right ladder. So I got a sales job within Octopus, which is basically fundraising. So calling potential investors and getting them to invest. Do that well, you can get into the investment track. So after a year or two at Octopus, I went from sales into being basically an administrator within the investment side, but knowing, sort of backing myself and taking a pay cut and all the rest of it, I knew that I could kind of climb that ladder of investment. So I went from administrator to analyst to associate to investment manager to principal, and then eventually now partner and kind of leading the team who run the £500 million B2B software fund.
Okay. No, well, yeah. And then what, I guess we'll come on to this later actually as to what next. But what I wanted to talk about next, if it's okay, is kind of how you and I ended up meeting each other. Now, I know we've got links through our parents.
Yeah.
And that, was really fortunate, but it's interesting in that for me, this clinic was a COVID idea.
Yeah.
So 2020 is when I kind of thought, that's not a bad idea. Let's have a think. And what I remember is I found this building mid 2020, and then realized I couldn't afford it. And then it was like, right, okay, now I need to look at how much money I've got and then find partners who can chip in. And I did find a financial partner who was willing to put up almost everything else. And what I remember is I was then given what was called a term sheet, which was almost like an A4 sheet of paper with a list of things on it. And at that point, I think I sent that to your dad via my mum. And he said, yeah, okay, you know what? Actually, why doesn't he speak to my son who kind of does this sort of thing? And then what I then recall is you were almost on the phone immediately going, we need to talk. This is potentially a disaster. Okay, be careful don't sign this until we have had a proper conversation. So I am eternally grateful to you, and that was, I don't know, serendipitous or whatever that you and I ended up meeting, and I'm so glad that happened, because we then worked on that piece of paper and made it fairer and better, and here we are. So can you, without getting necessarily yet, or we'll use it as an example, I guess, can you tell me in kindergarten terms almost about how this world works almost? So someone like me, I have an idea, okay, and I remember you telling me, look, that's not enough. Great ideas come and go all the time. But it's making that idea work is everything. So that's it's a big question. But if you can almost explain to the audience, or a numpty like me, which is how I still consider myself. I'm not a financial expert, but I've learned a lot from you, from everyone. Tell me. So I've got an idea. I'm someone who does my thing, surgery, and I have an idea. What should be happening next?
So talking very generically, kind of, and like entrepreneurialism and thinking about these things, I think you need to separate it into different parts.
Yep.
And I think the problem that often happens when people want to start new businesses is that they can conjoin these parts and they get very confused, and then it becomes difficult to then separate them. And the first thing that happens is that the idea just takes over before you've had chance to step back. And you have an idea and a vision in your head that you're trying to communicate to people. But, you have to first of all park that slightly and say, okay, well, that's an idea and that's a great kernel of idea. Let's now start to unpick that. And first of all say, who are we actually building this for? Like, who is our customer? Like, who is going to be using whatever it is that we're building? And so I think when we had, this discussion, when we were talking about it, it was a lot about, okay, is this, who are we building this surgery for? Are we building it predominantly for patients? Or are we building it predominantly for people to come and use it? And therefore, what benefits are you going to give to those different people? And after a time, we started to really hone down on who it was that we were building this place for.
Because I was probably a nightmare client, as it were, because this building had already been found. I could almost picture myself sitting right here doing what I do. And it's like, I can see it'll work. If I build it, they will come, kind of thing is almost what I remember thinking in my mind. And I remember you saying, no, calm down. It doesn't work like that. It shouldn't work like that. You need to be a lot more sensible. Is that
Well, sort of like I think my thing was more like, why this building? Because the building is not the business. The business is, can you produce a product that people want to buy? And who is it those people are, and who do they want to buy? And I think at the first you kind of like, you could imagine both the customer coming in, and you could imagine doing the brand, and you could imagine your surgeons being here, and all this good stuff. I was like, great, but if you're building this for the customer, you then got to employ the surgeons, and you're like, well, no, I want them to. I want this to be for them as well. I'm like, okay, well, that's maybe a different service.
That's which is what we've sort of ended up with. Almost,
so now you've built this fantastic place for surgeons to come and use. And therefore you offer services based on that principle. And maybe that is some marketing. Maybe that is building some customers for them and but that's for them, not for you, not for your brand. So it's a different way of looking at it. And then it's like, well, okay, that's the product. Is this definitely the right building for it? Because maybe there's another building. Maybe there's a cheaper building. Maybe there's one that's already fitted out somewhere. And after we'd done that exploration, it was like, no, this is the product. We're building this place for surgeons. We're going to make it really nice for them, make it really easy, make it easy for them to book. And, we might even help them try and build customer bases and things like that, which you've managed to achieve. And then it's like, okay, now we know that. Is this the right building? And okay, it was. So it kind of came full circle. But at least we've gone through those steps. And that business plan was then built against surgeon first. All the time thinking, that is our customer. That's who we've got to make this for. And that gets lost quite a bit as well, where people just aren't quite sure who they're building for. They often build something that's almost for them rather than for the person.
I think we see that a lot actually in plastic surgery in particular. I can think of almost vanity projects. And it's kind of, so one of the reasons I've never named my private practice is not called Nav Cavale Limited or Nav Cavale Plastic Surgery. It was always, Real Plastic Surgery as almost a generic name, and then the clinic is the Real Clinic, because it isn't about me. It's interesting. It took a while for me to unpick that in my mind, I think, almost. And it isn't. This place is so not about me now. It's actually, as you say, it's about other surgeons who are our core customer. And yes, maybe we're advertising to the public and trying to get them to walk in through the door. But that was something that I have to say you helped me with a lot early on. The other thing you helped me with, I think, that again I'm eternally grateful for, is the investment side of things. Now, I knew I couldn't invest, and I did find people that wanted to invest, and then talk me through your point of view.
So I was going to come on to that. So I think before you get into the financing, it's like before you get into the financing, before you get into the building, before you first of all have to design that proposition, which is what we've talked through. So you've designed the proposition. You now need to go, okay, well, how much do I need for this proposition? How much do I need to make this a reality? And that will change depending on what sort of business you're going to run. And it sounds like common sense, but it's interesting how many times people get this wrong. Are you going to be a private jet service, or are you going to be Ryanair? What do you want to be known for? Are you going to be top of the range, or are you going to be middle, at the bottom? And the trouble is, if you kind of market yourself as being top of the range, but then you deliver a bottom of the range service, then you're completely conflated. Anyway, so you've decided what your proposition is. what the money is that you're going to need, and then you get onto the actual financing elements of it. And there's tons of ways, and we discussed at length all the different potential ways you could finance it. And
give me a rundown of those, just for for our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. It's difficult to say. We're very fortunate in this country that we have something called the Enterprise Investment Scheme and the Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme and Venture Capital Trust, which are all, I won't go into the detail, but very tax efficient ways of finding financing for companies. And then we have lots of different platforms, whether that be kind of like crowdfunding that people may have seen, which we discussed as a potential, all the way to venture capital trusts such as the one that I run, such as angel syndicates. You have these people called angel investors. Angel investors are basically high net worth individuals that like an idea and put the money behind that. So often with the tax benefits as well. So there's just a whole spectrum all the way through to bank loans, you know, and actually going to your bank and getting, virgin startup loans or whatever it might be. So you do have to do a lot of investigation into all these different ways of potentially getting financing, because they all come with their pros and cons. For a good friend of mine always says, when you're selling equity, for example, so that means when somebody wants to take a share of your company, you can only sell that share once. So like, if you're going to sell equity in your business to start it up, you better make sure that is worthwhile, because okay, it might seem cheap to sell 10, 20% of your company today, but if your company becomes worth 100 million, that's been extremely expensive, versus maybe taking a bank loan of £100,000. You only ever have to repay £100,000. So it feels more risky in some respects to start with, but actually could be a lot cheaper in the future. So you've got to make these decisions. And then it's like, okay, especially for startups, is kind of what comes with that money. The money is the money, and you might agree on the share of equity and the percentage of equity, think forward. But then it's like, what comes with that? Does it come with any support? Does it come with any advice? And does it come with any onerous terms? And I think a lot of small business owners, when they get first investment, can be so excited to get the money, so excited to hear that their money's there.
Someone wants to invest in me. They think I'm worth it.
Exactly. And somebody like yourself, who's like such an expert, such a leader in their field, brings so much to that game, more than money, but can feel, oh my goodness, there's people that want to invest. I'm not bringing anything. Well, actually, without you, there is nothing. And actually, they're not bringing anything but the cash, which is here and there. And at that point, you kind of say, okay, what are in these terms, or the term sheet, as you said, like what are these clauses in there that could really unstick me? And common clauses that can really unstick you. Things like leaver clauses.
So what does that mean?
So leaver clauses is something that's quite common, but what it means is often if the business is not successful, or if you as the founder should decide to leave the business, the investors that have put their money into your business will just take your shares from you. So you'll have like leaver clauses. So it means basically
nothing. Basically,
I mean, as from the investment side, I'm saying, well, I'm not just investing in the business, I'm investing in you. So therefore, I've put my, I don't know, let's call it 100,000. I've put my 100,000 into you, and you decide to walk off tomorrow. I'm stuffed. So I want there to be quite a big penalty for you moving on tomorrow. So that would be leaver clauses. You have to be really careful. Make sure you understand it. The next one would be something called a drag right. Or a drag clause.
Hearing about that,
and drag clause basically means like, I don't know, you can have all sorts of drag clauses, but it might say something like, if we have 50% of the shares, we can drag all other shareholders to an exit at whatever valuation that we want to drag them to an exit. So what does that mean? Okay, the place isn't doing that well, but these other backers now own 50%, or it doesn't have to be 50, it could be 30, it could be 40, it could be any number. And it could be specific to them. They could say our share class, as long as our share class decide we want to exit, then we will just drag all of other shareholders to an exit. And
so that was something that I had assumed, that if you own, I don't know, 50% of the company and somebody else owns 50%, then you both have 50-50 kind of say, as it were, in terms of whether you buy, sell, do this, do that, the other. But that doesn't necessarily follow, because it could be that someone who owns 2% of the company has all of the control because that's what's been written into the term sheet and whatever clauses, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So you would have so often, when we invest into a company, we will have a different share class. So you will have A, ordinary shares, and I'll have maybe A, preferred shares.
Yeah.
And what that will mean is that often if we sell the company, the first thing that happens is I get a certain amount of money back before you even get a look in. Yeah. I, as the investor, get either.
So I think that's the really important thing. I think that I remember learning is that it's not just because it doesn't follow it that there are shares and then there are shares, there are rights and then there are rights, and it can all be written in spite. You could put 98% of the money in, yet still only on paper own 2% of the company, yet you could still write it such that you have 100% of the control, as far as I can make out. And I don't think people realize that, like people
not just myself. Control as well. I mean, common sense would say, well, we all have a certain amount of shareholding and then we all have the vote according to our shares. Yeah. This just does not work like that. Yeah. Absolutely doesn't work like that. Exactly. And not just on the control, not just on whether I've got the right to sell the company from underneath you, whether I've got the right to prevent you from investing again, from other people to invest. I might have a clause that says no one is allowed to invest unless I say so. Yeah. Why does that matter? Because if you run out of cash and somebody else says, well, I'll invest in the company, existing investors might say, no, don't want you to. I want you to sell, not to take more. Yeah. And then you also might have clauses which give them bigger economic rights. Yeah. I've seen clauses that might say we want 3 times our money before anyone else takes any money out. Yeah. So we want a guaranteed sort of 3 times return. Yeah. Well, it's not guaranteed if the business goes bust, but if the business makes a return, we get our money out 3 times before anyone else gets anything.
And so, if others out there don't have an Ed as a friend, what would you advise them to do? Who should they go and speak to? I'm not suggesting they come and speak to you because you're not, you just happen to be around, but and it's not quite the realm that you work in. So don't all start phoning Ed, please. But what should somebody like me do if they are at that stage?
Although I have to say that you did buy me some really nice wine. So I mean, if that's
it took a while. I remember
it was rather special. So I don't know. There might be maybe some benefits. Maybe, depends if you've got the same wine list as Nav does.
But are there people out there that you could you can contract?
Yeah, I mean,
to help you. What sort of people are we talking about?
Lawyers, essentially. So I work a lot with people like Tom Wilde over at Shoesmiths and LP over at Shoesmiths. Yeah. I mean, they are amazing, fantastic lawyers, great people. And certainly if you're looking at tax incentivized investments, then somebody like Tom Wilde is somewhere I would point people. Yeah. The only thing is that costs. Yeah. And it all costs. But I mean, they might charge you £5,000 for the bit of advice they give you, which sounds a lot of money over the whatever. But ultimately, that would, if you're really serious about your business, that's going to save you millions upon millions and millions of pounds potentially in the future and protect you and make you feel a lot more comfortable. Yeah. And as we know from our experience, bad lawyers are make the matter worse. Yeah. There's other if you want to go for a cheaper option because you're thinking of starting something. There's a firm called Seed Legals out there.
I remember you mentioning them to me.
Yeah, Seed Legals is great, and they've got their own lawyers as well. Yeah. It's a great kind of low cost option for people that really understand tax incentivization. Okay. And that sort of thing. One thing I would say about the legal agreements, and just to always keep in your mind, is that legal agreements are not marriage agreements. People treat them like they're marriage agreements. They're divorce agreements.
Yes, they're prenups almost.
They are prenups. And what happens is that you'll sign off, you'll forget about them, and then 4 or 5 years' time, something happens, and those documents come out the drawer. Yeah. And every single clause is poured over. What was meant by that clause, how it was meant to sit together, how did we agree it? And even worse, the person at the other end of that legal document is probably changed. Yeah. So I don't know, and so they're reinterpreting what was said. Yeah. And look, I have spent a lot of my, a lot of time going back through clauses because often you have a number of different documents. You have the investment agreement, which lays out how the investment itself will be made. Yeah. You have the shareholder agreement, which says how we're going to act between each other as shareholders. Yeah. And you have the articles of association, which are basically like the rules that found the company. So a lot of the sort of difficult clauses might be in that,
Yeah.
which is actually a document of public record on Companies House,
Yes.
the articles.
Yeah.
And so, within that, there's probably 250, 300 pages, even with a small business.
Yeah.
There's so many clauses in there. You better, if I could give you any advice around this, is you better make sure you know what every single one of those clauses does
Yeah.
before signing it. Because it's not like a mobile phone contract
Yeah.
where we just sign it and we don't even
Yeah.
read it and we don't forget about it. These contracts will be negotiated and then looked over. And if you have somebody on the other side that understands them and understands the mechanics of what these clauses do, and you don't,
then
you're going to be in trouble, because you might have the case where you have a golden share drag clause, which basically gives you zero control over the business that you've just started to build.
Yeah, no, that was a revelation that I had just not realized, and I think that's something that people really should think about before they undertake something like this. And then, you were very helpful in that we then wrote what was a very fair term sheet for the people that invested in this clinic, and I think we've got a pretty fair agreement between all the investors. And it's working okay. We're doing all right as far as that's concerned. Once you get up and running, now this is probably where I'm now looking for advice. We're at a stage where we're up and running. We're doing okay. We're not doing great. We're not doing badly. We're kind of doing all right. We'd like to do a lot better, obviously. What do you then? Because I'm guessing once you've invested in a company, you're watching them, and you want to know that they're doing okay or doing right by you. What are the sorts of things that you're watching for? So how could I be misbehaving, or how is it that you know that I'm behaving?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question. So I sit on the boards and have sat on the boards of lots and lots of different companies from, I won't go into it, but from all sorts of different sort of industries and with all sorts of different CEOs. I mean, what I would say is if the in terms of the kind of relationship between the investor and the management team, is that you hope that you never think about the legal agreements. You hope that you're just in a collaborative relationship where you're both looking for the success of the company, which is what you've got here, which is great. Doesn't always happen, I have to say. Some people think they take them. Some people think they'll get the money and they can then just do what they like with that money and leave me alone and never sort of darken my door again. That can be really difficult. Takes a lot of kind of emotional intelligence to try and find an equilibrium around that. But I would say for my role as the investor, it massively depends what happens with the company. If the company's doing well, the honest truth is you're probably best off just getting out of the way. You can help guide and help advise and just like we have done, sort of suggest people that might be able to help along the way. But ultimately, if people are doing the right job, the last thing they need is you nipping at them as an investor. Actually, though, as we know, the majority of small businesses fail. That is just a fact. And you guys
what kind of percentage are we talking about?
There's so many different statistics on it.
Okay.
There's so many. 90% is the one that gets kind of banded about. But it depends on, there's a lot of small businesses that start up one-man band. Plumbers that decide not to be plumbers anymore. So it's very hard. But even with venture-backed companies, I would say, over half of them fail generally. Okay. So it's a huge proportion. So when we make our investments, when we're looking at those investments, we're looking to support the companies that we invest into. And if I'd say, over my decade plus of experience of like what's the number one thing that sort of spoils a company or ruins a company, it tends to be the lack of focus on who their core offering is to. So the thing is, when you start with your ideation, we talked about it, you've got a great idea of what you want to do, who the customer is, you blah, blah, blah. And then you build the thing. And then all of a sudden, everyone is probably patting you on the back and telling you how well you're doing. You're going to dinner parties, you're talking about it. And before you know it, all these people are telling you, well, you should do this, or you should do that. You should move to America. You should move over to the Middle East. Why don't you do a dentistry model? Why don't you do it? And you've gone from having a really core idea of what you wanted to all of these things pulling your mind away from that and pulling your focus away from that. And the businesses that do really, really well, they know who their core customer is and they just service the hell out of that core customer and they don't stop doing it and they don't get distracted. And, Netflix had a term for this. So Mark Randolph, the founder of Netflix, had a term for it and he called it the Canada problem.
Okay.
So Netflix had got to a stage with their subscription service where they thought about entering Canada.
Right.
And when they thought about it, everyone was like, well, we can increase revenues by 10%. We've seen a big pull from Canada, blah, blah, blah. And they said, no, we're not going to do it. Why? Because it's a different language. It's a different mailing system. It's just, etc. All sorts of different things. And that would take us away from what our core...
I think this is when they were posting DVDs out, wasn't it?
This is when they were posting. I mean, Netflix defined what it meant to be a subscription service.
Yeah.
They said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to go back to the US and we are absolutely going to nail this market, because every minute we spend doing something else is a minute we're not servicing our core offering and our core person. And so, you know, when I talk to small businesses, a lot of the time it's trying to keep them from obviously not being blinkered, not understanding what's out there, but actually saying, how can we service our core person better? How we can do better for our core customer. And, you know, Netflix went on to reject doing kind of physical sites within supermarkets and doing... Well, they originally started selling DVDs and then they stopped selling DVDs because they just wanted to focus down. So, you know, the more you can do that, the better. Because what tends to happen is customers as well will start to drag you in a different direction. You know, I don't know, maybe for you, all of a sudden you get like a big private hospital says, actually, Nav, what we want to do is we want you to set up a little clinic within our big hospitals. And it'll be branded with your brand, but it'll be within our hospitals. We'll do it across the country. And then you're like, how much are you going to pay me? And they're like, £1 million. And you're like, oh my goodness, that's incredible. But whilst you're doing that, you're being dragged away.
You're ignoring your home base, as it were.
You're not spending that time working on. So, you know, you have to have effectively 3 ingredients that you look at, which is, number 1 is that you have to have vision and mission. If you don't have a real vision and mission of what you're doing, you're just kind of going around and doing any old thing. You have to have customer engagement. People have to want your product. If people don't want your product, then, you know, it doesn't really matter what you do. Ultimately, you have to build something people want. And then the third thing you need is scalability. What does scalability mean? Scalability means the ability to repeat what you're doing time and time and time again and making it more and more efficient the way you do it. So next time, you know, the next surgery you open, you'll have learned all the lessons from this one, and you'll be able to repeat things in a way that you've learned from this time. And hopefully you'll be able to just do that cookie cutter time and time and time again.
And when I mean, I'm not thinking about that at the moment. We did kind of think, oh, maybe we can open one in here, there, everywhere. But we've calmed down a bit now, I think, you know, as you've suggested. But when do you then start going, okay, we're at a stage where we can expand? Because because you can keep honing your original idea, your original base, and that's almost infinite, isn't it? So at what point do you suggest you start looking?
People often talk about 10% of your core. You know, once you're at sort of 10% of the market within what you're being able to service. I mean, it's not a science. I mean, look at the iPhone. You know, how many products does Apple have? You know, not many. Some businesses are super complicated that are massive. Some business like, you know, Tesla. How many products does Tesla have? Not really that many. You know, they're just trying to sell their core proposition to their core target audience time and time again. For something, you know, for a business like this, I would say once you've got the machine and you've worked out the machine and the machine is profitable and actually you're confident in that machine that you can repeat it elsewhere is when at the point in which I would expand. Expanding before you've made the machine, which a lot of people do, it's the biggest problem. You hire too many people, you build too many practices, whatever it might be. You make it harder to then build the machine, to build the formula, because there's so many other distractions elsewhere. So for somewhere like this, I'd be like, once you've got this to the occupancy rate and the profitability that you want it at, I'd be thinking about, okay, well, where can I expand to? Where can I move to? Until that point, put all your energies into doing that. Everything else is a distraction.
One of the things that, you know, everyone does want to do is build a machine. But it's interesting. I think the distractions are almost sometimes a little bit more exciting. It's probably I think we're in that phase right now with the Real Clinic. It's almost the tedium. It's just doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's, you know, making the burgers, getting the bun right.
Yeah.
It's not sexy. It's not exciting. It's just repetitive, mundane, but, you know, hopefully getting, you know, marginal increases and getting better at it. And that's also possibly something that a lot of people don't quite get, is the tedium of it. And it is probably a bit like what the sort of stuff that we've tried to escape over the years, which is the mundanity of an office job or you're being employed by someone. So it is.
Entrepreneurship is lonely. I mean, entrepreneurship is a lonely job. So my very best friend in the world, who's extremely close to, he is, a successful businessman. He's built and sold, businesses, and he says, people say, oh, it must be great being an entrepreneur. You've got you could just do what you like. You can wake up when you want. And it's like, they're talking nonsense. I've got the hardest boss in the world. Because if I don't get my job right, there isn't a business and everyone becomes unemployed. He runs a 100-person recruitment consultancy. It's like, if it goes wrong on my watch, all these people lose their jobs. I wake up every single morning with that on my shoulders. It's like, I have the hardest boss, not the easiest boss. And he said, probably more than half the time I wake up and I just wish somebody would tell me what to do. And the decision making for an entrepreneur can be really tough. That element of just going, what do I do next? Like, what is the right choice? There's no boss here telling me to what choices to make or where to go. It's like, I've got to make those choices. And I think that's why I love entrepreneurs. I just love entrepreneurs because I think there's this element of creativity but bravery that go with these two things that is so unusual. There's not that many people that have that mindset that can both create and be brave enough to take it on, but also then that discipline to build that scalability within what they've made. Those three elements of an entrepreneur, I just think is fascinating. And it's not everyone that has those. And I've worked with lots of them that maybe have two of those three, but they don't have all three.
Yeah, and I kind of think of bravery / stupidity as being...
Oh, you have to have a screw loose, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to, but... I don't know, maybe...
It seemed like a good idea. I mean, it literally... There are so many things I didn't think about before making this leap. And then made the leap and it's like, oh, okay, right, now I've cut myself off from that. But it kind of worked out.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of thinking, geez, that could have been a car crash. And it wasn't. And I'm lucky, so, okay, got away with that. So I think... I don't know. I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur, but people have said,
of course, you're an entrepreneur. This place is the definition of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I just don't. I think I bumble along and just do whatever that seems like a good idea, and then it kind of works out okay. And it's not easy.
Do you know what I found fascinating is that the true entrepreneurs, the best entrepreneurs, are the entrepreneurs who don't like to think of themselves as entrepreneurs.
Okay.
They think of themselves more as people with ideas that they want to make into reality, that they don't like the term entrepreneurship. Whereas the people that want to be what do you do as a job? I'm an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
They tend to be more about the ego and more about the badge and more about the kind of...
It's like kids who want to be influencers, I guess.
Yeah,
these days,
exactly.
isn't it?
And so, even I say my very good friend who's done this entrepreneurship journey really successfully a number of times, he's like, I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur. I'm like, why not? He's like, to be an entrepreneur, you have to do it like hundreds of times. I'm like, it's not really the definition of an entrepreneur. But you definitely fall into that category. Okay. But yes, maybe a screw loose would be the fourth element.
I think that is definitely something. Actually, it's a kind of slightly just.
If you don't like risk, it's definitely not a job. If you don't like risk and uncertainty, do not become an entrepreneur. Because there is one thing that's going to be absolutely sure, is that whatever you build will not look exactly like what you were planning to, or even if it does, it won't have got there in the way that you thought it would.
I think the other thing I'd say, which is certainly true for colleagues of mine, I would say is that you can't do this alone. I think that there's very few entrepreneurial businesses or that certainly in plastics that I would say I couldn't have done this without the partners, especially the clinical partners that have got an anaesthetist, an ophthalmologist, a physician. You
couldn't do it at scale, but I mean, one of the main jobs. What is an entrepreneur's job? It's to sell the vision.
Yeah.
To really sell who is the customer, what am I selling to them? It's to inspire then the other people. So when people say, what do you look for in founders? I often say, well, I don't look for the necessary kind of stereotypical Hollywood, shouty entrepreneur type thing. But what I do look is like who can sell a vision. And, part of the reason why I was more than happy to work with you is because I could tell that you had a passion and a vision that you could then sell to other people, which means that you'll be able to line up a management team and line up a group of people that will be able to then enact upon that vision. So that becomes and then it's resource allocation and time allocation. So that's really a job of the entrepreneur. Once you've sold the vision, you've found the right people and you know where you're placing the resources, hopefully if you've got those things right, then the business should work well. But it's actually, there's not that many people that can inspire others to follow them.
I think I get that. We're probably getting close to time-ish. Coming back to you.
Yeah.
So you've been in Octopus for 16 years.
16 years, yeah. So for the first decade, everyone thought I worked for a weirdly sounding investment company. And now everyone thinks I work for an energy company. Yeah. But I don't.
So what's going to happen? What's your plans now? Or what? I mean, you don't have to tell us what's happening next for Octopus, but what's next for you? Is it more of the same? Are you going to do this till you retire?
Who knows? I mean, I spent most of my 30s planning on becoming a partner in a VC firm. So I'm trying to spend my 40s just enjoying each moment as it comes. Yeah. I mean, the beauty of venture capital is that every single day I work with different companies. I see different companies. Yeah. I mean, there's so much variety. And, I heard a very experienced VC once say, it's like, what do you do when you've done, VC? It's like more VC, because it never ends. Like right now we're in this incredible AI revolution, which is going on. There's so many fascinating AI companies that are coming up right now that require investment, that are going to change the way in which we work. And so, it's hard to give that up. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's really difficult. I mean, I generally spend a lot of time dealing with companies that are maybe struggling or going through exits, and it's going to be very emotive and it's going to be, tricky, but ultimately it's intellectually fascinating.
And is it for you, the thing that keeps you going, is it the company itself, the machine, or is it the people, or is it the money? What is it that continues to drive you day to day?
Definitely not the money. Yeah. I'd be an investment banker if it was the money.
Yeah.
Or an entrepreneur. Yeah. No, what keeps me going? I work with wonderful people, so I really enjoy my colleagues, and they're absolutely brilliant. So that's great. I don't have, I've got my boss who's been my boss for 7 years. He's a good friend, and he'll pick me up when he needs to pick me up and tell me what I've been doing wrong. But generally, is like we work really solidly together, and I trust him a lot. And so that's great. Yeah. So I'm in that sense, I'm in a good place. I don't see myself leaving Octopus for another decade. Yeah. Because, I don't know, why would you? Get to meet fascinating entrepreneurs like you. So
and finally, the sort of googly question. If you're now talking to that kid that was in business school or in Oxford and about to start working in Rolls-Royce, say, what advice would you give that kid?
I wouldn't give them any advice. I don't think you should. I think I probably wouldn't give. I'd like that kid to give me some advice. Yeah. Probably be a bit more risk taking. Be a bit more, see all the opportunities out there. Maybe I don't know. I just I often do the exercise of like, and I'm sure you do too, being somebody, but like you think back 20 years. If somebody 20 years ago had turned around to me and said, in 20 years' time, you'll be leading a team of £500 million venture capital fund, you'll be married to a beautiful, lovely wife with 3 gorgeous kids in a nice house and blah, blah. I'd have ripped their arm off. So that kid made all the right decisions back then. Yeah. So I'm not gonna give him any advice.
That's fair enough. No, absolutely. I haven't heard that answer before. That's cool. So yeah, I mean, is there anything that I guess back to you, just as have I forgotten to ask you something that you're desperate to tell me about, or is there a summary that you want to say to the next plastic surgeon?
The only thing I would say that we haven't really touched on, which I think was important with your business as well, would be don't forget the numbers. Yeah. Do not forget the finances behind it all.
Absolutely.
So many good ideas are a good idea, but actually financially don't make any sense. Yeah. There's you come up with a great idea for a pizza company, but then you find out every time you make a pizza, you lose £1. Yeah. It's not gonna work.
It'd be a great pizza.
You might make a great pizza, but if you can't sell it for enough, then it's not going to work. So my advice is, don't start with a slide deck. Start with a spreadsheet. Yeah. Okay. Start putting numbers in. Like, it's not going to be right, but at least make sure that what you're thinking about actually makes money, and then make sure there's a big enough market for it. Yeah. I had a friend come to me not so long ago and say, I've got basically an app for the supermarkets. It's like, okay, well, how much are you selling it for? It's like, well, £100,000 to each supermarket. I'm like, well, there's only 10 supermarkets. That's £1 million.
Yeah.
That's not a big market. That's a tiny market. You can't, there's no business there. And so I would say the world is full of good ideas. Yeah. It takes bravery to execute on those ideas and have a go with it. But it also, just through a bit of common sense and a bit of, sensible thinking, you can start to map out the numbers and say, well, actually, is there something here? Is this just something that I would like?
Yeah.
Or is it actually something there's a big enough market that lots of people would like, and there is enough pull for it? Yeah. And I'd say probably I always try and play devil's advocate with friends, because most of the time, all their family and friends will tell them it's a wonderful idea, it'll definitely work, it'll always be swimmingly. And so I try and play that a bit like I did with you, ask challenging questions, ask the questions you don't want to answer.
And others are also waiting for you to see what happens,
Yeah, exactly. And they'll either say, well done, or I always knew it was a bad idea. Whereas I'd rather say, well, have you thought about the market size? Yeah. Is there enough people that want this service, and are they going to pay for it? And if there isn't, then it doesn't matter how good the idea is for you. It's not a business. It's, so I would say
it's a vanity project. Yeah.
It's a vanity project again. And so I would say, when you're thinking of starting your own business, get a spreadsheet. It can be super simple, and just think through those basic numbers. Is there actually a business here that people would pay for? And that's probably the last thing. It sounds a bit of a geeky way to finish that, isn't it?
That's
it's a bit
good.
nerdy.
I think
Excel.
that's actually
my last bit of advice is Excel, which is proper boring.
Yeah, God, I still can't get my head around Excel. No, thank you. I think that's great. I think that's a very good point to end on, actually, because I think that's a really important point, and it's almost the fundamental thing that I had not thought about when we first met. So officially on tape, thank you for helping me. That has been great, actually, and I really appreciate it, and I always will. But thank you for coming today.
No problem. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cold, so
that's all right. No,
probably sneezing down the microphone.
I struggled. We've edited out, I think, all of our coughing fits. Thanks, and thanks Santiago, actually, for doing it as well. Let's maybe do this again in 10 years' time, when you said you're going to be an octopus for a decade. I think I'm still going to be here for a decade.
Excellent.
And let's reflect on what rubbish we were talking today, perhaps.
But if anyone is interested that's listening, I'm active on LinkedIn, so post lots of stuff about business
We'll put links. We'll put your LinkedIn link and stuff on the blurb that goes with the podcast. Thank you once again, and thank you everyone for watching, listening. See you next time.